April 18, 1945. The Ruhr Pocket, Western Germany. 500,000 Werkt soldiers, battle-hardened veterans who had fought from Stalingrad to Normandy, made a decision that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. They surrendered en masse to American forces, rather than continue fighting or retreat to German lines. What the Americans had unleashed wasn't just superior firepower. It was something far more devastating, a systematic approach to warfare that made resistance not just futile but irrational. April 4, 1945, 0600 hours east bank of the Rhine River. Lipetsk sector. The encirclement was complete. Field Marshal Walter Model, commander of Army Group B, stood in his provisional headquarters, studying maps that told an impossible story. In just 12 days, American armored spearheads had achieved what German military doctrine considered operationally impossible: the complete encirclement of an entire army group, 325,000 combat troops, plus supporting units, supply personnel, and stragglers, bringing the total to over 430,000. Men trapped in a pocket roughly 50 m wide. But the numbers themselves weren't what made this moment unprecedented in military history. German forces had been encircled before at Stalingrad, at Pfeil-See, at countless smaller engagements across the eastern and western fronts. What made the Ruhr Pocket different was what happened next, or rather what didn't happen. There would be no desperate breakout attempts, no suicidal last stands, no fanatical resistance to the last bullet. Instead, over the next 2 weeks, the largest mass surrender in Western Front history would unfold, and it would reveal something that terrified the German high command more than any weapon. Their soldiers had stopped believing in resistance. The Americans, German military dominance and tactical excellence, called their approach vertical envelopment. But that clinical term masked a revolution in combined arms. Warfare that had been perfected over 3 years of combat from North Africa to the Rhine. Major General J. Elton Collins, commanding 7th Corps, had developed a system of warfare that didn't just defeat German positions, it made defending them psychologically impossible. The German soldiers trapped in the Ruhr had been told for years that American forces were soft, inexperienced, reliant on material superiority rather than fighting skill. They had been assured that German tactical excellence and superior willpower would overcome American industrial might. Army Group B contained veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had survived Kursk and Kiev, soldiers who knew how to fight in encirclements, and had broken out before. Yet within days of the pocket's formation, entire divisions were surrendering without firing a shot. By April 18th, when Model dissolved Army Group B and released his men from their oath, over 317,000 had already laid down their arms. By the time the pocket was completely cleared, on April 21st, American forces had processed 325,000 prisoners, with estimates suggesting total captures, including those who surrendered in the immediate aftermath, exceeded 500,000 when counting attached Luftwaffe, SS, and paramilitary units throughout the industrial Ruhr region. What the Germans encountered wasn't a conventional military force. It was an integrated system of destruction that operated on principles they had never, not from the Soviets, not from the British, not in any previous campaign. The Americans had developed something that military historians would later recognize as a fundamental evolution in warfare: the ability to make continued resistance not just difficult or costly, but functionally meaningless. The weapon wasn't a single piece of technology. It was the seamless integration of air power, armor, artillery, logistics, and psychological operations into a machine that ground down not just German combat capability, but German will to fight. Every element reinforced the others, creating a cascade effect that made each hour of resistance more futile than the last. His final message before dissolving Army Group B, Model wrote, "The Americans do not fight battles. They stage industrial operations. Our men face not an army but a system. Courage means nothing when the enemy can predict your every move, answer your every action, and make your position untenable before you even occupy it." 3 weeks later, Model walked into the woods near Duber and shot himself. He left no note, but his aide recorded his final words, "A field marshal does not surrender, and I cannot ask my men to do what I cannot." But his men had already made their choice, not because they were cowards, but because they had recognized a truth that their commanders refused to accept. The Americans had created a form of warfare where traditional military virtues, courage, tactical skill, determination became irrelevant. You couldn't outfight a system that had already calculated every possible response. You couldn't outmaneuver forces that controlled every approach. You couldn't outlast an enemy whose supply lines stretched back to an untouched industrial heartland and ocean. But the story of the Ruhr Pocket isn't about a battle. It's about the moment when industrial age warfare reached its logical conclusion, when one side's systematic approach made the other side's continued resistance not just impossible but pointless. 500,000 German soldiers didn't surrender because they were defeated in combat. They surrendered because they had been made obsolete. The German military doctrine that failed so catastrophically in April 1945 had been born from success. For 5 years, the Wehrmacht had conquered a continent using principles that had proven devastatingly effective: speed, concentration of force, tactical flexibility, and the superior training of individual soldiers and small unit commanders. The concept was off-sick tactics where commanders at every level understood the overall objective and had the authority to achieve it through their own initiative. The German lieutenant could react to battlefield conditions faster than an American colonel could receive orders from division headquarters. This decentralized command structure had enabled German forces to consistently outmaneuver more numerous opponents. From Poland in 1939 to France in 1940, from the Balkans to the initial campaigns in Russia, this system had worked brilliantly. German soldiers were extensively trained with even basic infantry receiving education that emphasized independent thinking and tactical awareness. A German squad leader had more authority and training than many Allied platoon commanders. This created a military culture where small groups of men could achieve disproportionate results through superior skill and initiative. By 1943, despite mounting losses and strategic setbacks, German tactical doctrine still produced impressive results. At Kasserine Pass in February 1943, relatively small German forces had inflicted humiliating defeats on American units in their first major engagement. The Germans had demonstrated that even when outnumbered and outgunned, superior tactics and veteran leadership could overcome material disadvantages. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, commanding Allied forces in North Africa, had been the Ruhr Fortress, Germany's perfect defense, forced to restructure American training and doctrine after Kasserine. The lessons were painful but clear. American forces needed fundamental changes in how they approached combat. Raw courage and industrial output weren't enough against an enemy who could consistently outthink and outmaneuver them at the tactical level. But the Germans had made a critical miscalculation. They assumed that warfare would continue to be decided by these tactical engagements, that battles would be won by better trained soldiers making better decisions in individual firefights. They believed that as long as German tactical excellence remained superior, they could offset American material advantages. What they failed to understand was that the Americans weren't trying to win tactical engagements. They were building a system that would make tactical excellence irrelevant. Between 1943 and 1945, the United States military underwent a transformation that had no parallel in military history. It wasn't about creating better individual soldiers, though American training did improve significantly. It was about creating an integrated system where individual tactical decisions mattered less than systematic operational superiority. The scale of American logistical preparation was something the German military couldn't conceptualize. By early 1945, American forces in Western Europe were supported by a supply network that delivered 26,000 tons of supplies daily. Every American division crossing the Rhine had artillery support that could deliver more tonnage in an hour than an entire German corps could fire in a day. But logistics alone don't explain the psychological collapse. The Soviets had enormous material superiority on the Eastern Front, yet German forces continued fighting with desperate determination, even in hopeless situations. At Budapest, German and Hungarian forces held out for 50 days in a siege that ended in near total annihilation. Breslau, the garrison fought for 82 days, continuing resistance even after Hitler's death. Against the Americans, that same determination evaporated. The difference wasn't firepower. It was predictability and inevitability. American doctrine had evolved into something the Germans called Material Schlacht, material battle. But that term didn't capture what made it psychologically devastating. The Americans had developed a systematic approach where every German action triggered a predetermined overwhelming response. Artillery observers called in fire missions within minutes. Air support appeared within an hour. Columns maneuvered to cut off withdrawal routes before German commanders even realized their positions were compromised. It wasn't that Americans predicted German moves through intelligence or brilliant generalship. They simply had enough resources to prepare for every possibility simultaneously. Colonel General Alfred Jodl, operations chief of the German Armed Forces High Command, wrote in his diary in March 1945, "Against the Americans, our tactical doctrine has become a prison. Every principle that served us well against the Poles, French, and even Soviets now works against us. Flexibility means nothing when the enemy has prepared responses to every option. Our initiative is meaningless when every action triggers overwhelming retaliation. We are fighting an opponent who doesn't need to outthink us. They've made thinking irrelevant." This was the context that Army Group B entered when American forces crossed the Rhine. They brought tactical excellence, veteran leadership, and determination to a fight where none of those qualities mattered anymore. They were prepared for a battle. What they encountered was an industrial process designed to make battle impossible. The German defensive preparations in the Ruhr represented the culmination of 5 years of hard-won tactical knowledge. Army Group B wasn't a collection of green recruits or demoralized garrison troops. It contained the 116th Panzer Division, veterans of the Normandy Campaign, the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division, which had fought through Italy and France, the 338th Infantry Division, survivors of the Eastern Front. These weren't men who broke easily. General Gunther Blumenried, commanding 1st Parachute Army within the pocket, had personally overseen defensive preparations throughout January and February 1945. His planning documents captured after the surrender revealed meticulous attention to lessons learned from 3 years of retreat. Every position had been sited with interlocking fields of fire. Every bridge had demolition charges. Every crossroad had been pre-registered for artillery. Every likely American approach had prepared defensive positions. The Ruhr industrial region itself provided natural advantages. The area contained over 4,000 factories, countless mine shafts, and urban areas perfect for defensive warfare. The terrain was broken by rivers, canals, and industrial complexes that channeled any attacking force into Predictable routes. German engineers had spent months preparing positions that would turn each factory, each urban block, each river crossing into a killing ground. Intelligence assessments, captured from German divisional headquarters, showed they understood American capabilities. They knew about American artillery superiority. Their doctrine called for immediate dispersal. When American forward observers were spotted, they knew about American air power. They planned operations during bad weather and prepared covered positions. They knew about American armor tactics. They prepared anti-tank positions in depth with carefully planned withdrawal routes. What made German commanders confident wasn't